Okay, everyone, welcome to the board of NHS Direct, NHS Trust. This is going to be a long meeting. We are going to be discussing our governance arrangements, and the upshot of which is going to, for today, mean that we stay in private board session for longer than we would normally do. I will try and schedule regular breaks during the proceedings, and if anybody says, if it gets too hot, gets unbearable, please say something, and we'll see if we can sort it out.
The chillers have been fixed.
That's fantastic. It does not feel too bad at the moment, actually. So, for those of you who are watching us online, we're in tolerable conditions, and you can't blame the temperature if anybody gets catchy. So, can I just welcome Chris now? That'd be the right thing to do. Would you like to do that on our behalf?
So welcome Chris, who's stepped up to be our interim or acting 111 Service Delivery Director and has been engaged very fully over the last 2.5 weeks or thereabouts in helping us to stabilise and move our 111 services forward. So I'm sure we will speak more of that, but welcome to Chris.
Okay, thanks very much. That's great. Welcome, Chris. Today we have apologies from Trevor Smith, Managing Director, who's on annual leave, from Trish Hamilton, who's on a study leave, and Peter Catchpole and Steve Duncan, non-executives. Steve will be dialing in for part of the meeting later on. So, if we can deal with our formal minutes and declarations of interest as quickly as we can. I haven't had any declarations of interest for today's meeting. Is there anyone who wants to make one now? Thank you very much, Alison. That's fantastic. No? Okay. So let's go to the minutes of the 25th of March board meeting, which was the last board we had here. Are there any matters of accuracy on those minutes? No? Nick, would you like to walk us through the action log?
Well, it won't take very long because there's one item on it and it's closed.
Fine. I mean, we are in a very fluid and fast-moving situation. So what we'll find, I think, is that some of these papers feel as though, somebody said to me the other day, anything that's more than 3 hours old at the moment feels like it's out of date. So I think we'll be finding that things like the action log are accurate in as far as they go, but they don't actually capture all the many things that are going on as a result of board meetings and other things. So that's something I think we just need to be aware of as we go through the meeting. Talking of the speed in which things are moving, we'll go straight on to the Chief Executive's report, which is the first thing in our performance section of today's agenda, which came out very recently.
This meets your definition of current as it was written in the last 3 hours. Yeah. Okay, so my Chief Executive's report, which for those online, I apologise because I doubt that the paper will yet be up on the internet, but it will be just as soon as we can make that happen. So I'll, as board members may well not have had a chance to read this, I'll walk through this at a reasonably slow pace. So there are two items: to provide a report back to the board on NHS Direct's 111 services, and secondly to provide a brief report back on the 0845 contingency. So firstly, the board will be aware, and it's reflected in our minutes of the meeting of the 25th of March, that there were substantial operational difficulties that arose following the launch of the North West and West Midlands 111 services. At our last board meeting, it was agreed that I would resume control of NHS Direct's 111 services, and that I would concentrate on 3 immediate priorities. The first of which was to stabilise the delivery of 111 services and ensure patient safety. The second, to establish, as far as we could, the reasons for the failures at the launch, and thirdly, to identify the immediate lessons and implications for the future. So I'm going to walk through briefly what has been achieved in each of those areas. So the first is that I can report that the 111 services that the Trust is providing are now stable, and that access rates, that's answered in 60, and abandonment rates are at very good levels. There continue to be some issues relating to the warm transfer of calls from call handlers to nurses, and callback rates are not yet at the contracted KPI levels. So there are some issues, but broadly speaking, the services are at a satisfactory level. Just historically, following launch, the week afterwards, the following weekend, we faced the step up to the Easter volumes, which of course is a busy 4-day period, and is historically the second busiest time after Christmas. And there was really superb commitment from staff at every level to increase our capacity to between double and threefold that which was present on at launch. And generally speaking, with the exception of one day where there was an ad astra technical failure which affected and hampered frontline staff for about 4 hours, the service levels over Easter were at acceptable levels. However, the underlying feature of our 111 delivery persists, which is that as a result of the difficulties at launch, calls that would normally have come into the 111 service have been diverted either to be answered by GP out of hours organisations or through to the 0845 contingency service. And that for the West Midlands and the North West, in aggregate, we're running at about 30% of the contracted forecast expected levels of calls. But clearly the calls that we are receiving, we are now dealing with well. And I've attached a day-by-day summary that shows the volumes, it shows the percentage that those volumes represent compared to the Commissioner forecast, and it shows the headline answered in 60 and abandonment rate. So that's there for the board to see. As part of our recovery process, clearly we have been looking internally at what we believe the causes were for the service failures. And whilst this is not in any way a comprehensive report back to the board, and there will be other discussions that the board will want to pursue in relation to this, I just provide a broad summary. The first and most significant feature is that call lengths that were experienced in 111 were very substantially greater than those planned for in the capacity plan. So that's the first and most obvious cause for the inability of the service to deal with the volumes of calls that came through. The second is that referral rates from call handlers or health advisors to nurses was again substantially higher than planned. So our nurses were dealing with more calls and those calls were longer in duration. The third factor is that the way that calls were routed around our system effectively meant that we were not making best use of the economies of scale in the way that we used staff. Fourthly, that the profile of when staff were on duty during the course of the day was an inefficient match, not a close enough match to the profile of calls coming through. And again, that would have undermined the utilisation, the effectiveness of that we used our staff. And then finally, there were some delays in getting staff fully trained and operational, precepted to be able to be fully used in the service, and those shortfalls were rectified within 1 week for call handlers or health advisors and within 2 weeks for nurses. But those are the broad reasons why the capacity was significantly under that which was needed to handle 100% of the expected calls. So Just turning to the third topic, which is reflecting on those lessons and what it means for the future. We have been engaged in intensive work to revise the capacity plans, and we've now established draft forward capacity plans which project forward that which we would need to achieve in order to handle 100% of the contracted volumes. And those are being discussed currently with commissioners and with NHS England. Overall, those plans do acknowledge, of course, that the Trust failed to meet the expectations of commissioners and of their local communities. And clearly that's something which we all deeply regret. The plans also reflect the commitment that we have to seek to meet the expectations of commissioners and to achieve the right outcomes for them and their communities. And the final point to note in terms of reflecting on issues for the future, we've also kept the NHS Trust Development Authority, effectively our economic regulator for NHS trusts, fully informed during this period on the plans that we have for rectifying the situation. So I'm very happy, before I go on to talk about the 0845 contingency, to answer any questions.
So are there any observations or questions on the 111 section of Nick's Chief Executive's report?
Do you want a
Trevor.
question about...
Sorry, I'll catch you in a minute.
It's not a question. I think, as non-executives, we should say that we fully recognise the extent of the failure of the organisation, which did have a detrimental effect on our patients. So I think we should be apologising to any patients who felt that they didn't get the service they deserved over this period.
Yes.
Having said that, we should also, I think, should recognise the support we got from colleagues across the NHS to help us manage these problems over what was a very, very busy period, and to recognise the progress that's being made in protecting the quality of the service we provide, whilst recognising that we're still not providing the level of service to some commissioners that we should be.
Thank you, Trevor. I think you expressed very well exactly where the board is on this. Tim.
Thank you. Really good that we've got data to have a look at, and thank you for that. And it does show that the performance is much better. But what caught my eye was the last point of answered in 60 seconds, which is a bit unfair, asking you a question on Monday.
That's a data error.
Is that a mistake?
Yeah, that's a data error.
Oh, jolly
Sorry.
good. Right. It looks like a mistake.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is.
Good.
Yes, I'm not quite sure where that's come from. Forgive me, that is odd.
It just looks odd. Because
Yeah, no,
everything
it's a
else
data
is
error.
good about the.
Yeah, no, it's been
it's
at or near 100%.
Okay.
Since.
Okay.
So, Nick, I'd like to just refer also to the data. So one of the challenges that we found in stepping up the 111 services and understanding how to rectify the problems is quality of information. And I know that's been a real focus of attention and will continue to be a focus of attention, so that's very challenging. You also quite rightly highlight the call length as one of those things that is really driving the amount of the number of staff that we need to answer calls being much higher than we had predicted. Do we have any indication of the availability of benchmarking information from other providers that would help us understand whether we are out of line with others or whether other people are facing similar issues and whether we might together address how to create a more efficient system?
The Department of Health and now I guess NHS England instituted an agreed minimum data set for 111 services, and that includes the information from providers on average handling time. However, I think it would be fair to say that there are as many ways of measuring average handling time as there are providers or services, and that there is a great deal of work that is needed to be done. It's the boring and painstaking kind of work that statisticians revel in, to get the data quality and the comprehensiveness of the data right, so that valid conclusions can be drawn. And I think it would be fair to say that at the moment that minimum data set information does not pass that test. I have raised, because clearly getting good information about average handling times, call lengths, not using the jargon, is vital to producing forward-looking and realistic plans, and getting really good, accurate information to check that we're not missing anything, and indeed that others who are facing similar sorts of problems, that we can all learn from each other's services and not operate in silos. So I have asked for NHS England's kind of advice on what they might be doing to help us with this problem, and they've replied to say they recognise the need, but they don't yet have anything beyond the MDS minimum data set information that's been published.
Okay, thank you. All right, should we go on then to talk about the performance of the 08?
So briefly, the 0845 contingency, and there is a similar, but without an aberrant data bar on the end. Tim, you'll be pleased to see. Report on the day-to-day performance of the contingency. And just to remind the board, the contingency was commissioned by NHS England in the event that it was needed for a period of time to back up the 111 services in the launch period, and it was commissioned to provide up to 50% of the previous year's volumes for the same period. So 50% of last year's Easter, for example. In the event, for the period up to and including Easter, as you can see from the day-to-day summary, the service was operating at 60 and one day reached 70% of normal previous year's volumes. So it's not surprising that in the first few days of the service levels were not exceptionally good, but they were certainly throughout this period within an acceptable range. Since Easter, the volume of calls has gradually declined and is now at around 35% of historic volumes, and service levels are extremely good, with answered in 60 at or near 100% and very, very low abandonment rates. So I think it would be fair to say that the service has stood up well, and because of course it has the inherent capability to prioritise patients at times when the service gets overloaded or extremely busy, I can say with confidence that our patients who were in most need of advice were dealt with promptly, and where the service levels did diminish when we were operating substantially beyond the commissioned capacity, that it was our patients in the least need with the most routine inquiries that had to wait longer.
And that prioritisation is something which is available to us in the 0845 service and not available in the 111 service?
Yes, although there are ways in which prioritisation is beginning to get used in 111 as well, and I know that's something that NHS England are interested in.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments to Nick on the 0845 service? Sue?
So not on the 0845,
Okay.
the broader picture. Nobody else of the 0845.
Okay, I mean, I think it's worth really thanking the staff who are doing that service too, and expressing our appreciation for how well that service, as you say, has stood up under unpredicted pressure, and has been able to carry on providing a safe and high quality service for patients during this very turbulent period. So that's really.
Of course, it's worth noting on that basis that, of course, a proportion of the staff who are providing that 0845 service are in fact on notice of redundancy and serving their notice out, and would plan to be leaving in June. Yeah,
which is all the more remarkable, the quality of service that they're providing, and a testament to the professionalism of our team. Sue?
That was the point I was going to make. Fine.
So I mean that's probably a good place to finish, reiterating on behalf of the board where Trevor Jones opened up, which is our regret for the service performance that we've experienced in our 111 service and having let down patients in the NHS, our gratitude for other parts of the NHS who've stood up to support us and to support patients in this difficult time, and our appreciation of the efforts of our staff who, under very difficult circumstances, have been doing a sterling job. Thank you. Okay, shall we carry on in our performance section and look at the performance packages, which Jackie is going to help steer us through.
Okay.
Not an enviable task, Jackie, given what you've got to help us with here. But
Okay, so in terms of the board performance report first, I've got it in 3 sections this time. So we've got the normal March board scorecard, but actually the information on the core services does include contingency up to the 31st of March. But for the 111 services, it doesn't include the new 111 services owned pilots. Then we've got the annualised board scorecard for 2012-13. And then the third section was the information that we've just gone through with on the 111 services and the 0845 contingency since March the 21st. I think it's fair to reflect that the March scorecard does reflect that there were difficulties and challenges facing us during the month. Access was reasonable, but there's a number of red elements, particularly on the subclinical access for the less urgent cases. The annualised scorecard looks good. Certainly for access, we performed well once again on patient satisfaction and complaints and general access to the services. Also pleased to note that on the sickness levels for the long-term sick, we did manage at the end of the year to achieve target, which is to have no more than 40 people on long-term sick by the end of the year. So we reached that at 39. And finances, generally we met our financial targets for the year. Does anybody want any sort of particular points to raise? We've already covered the 111 and the 0845 contingency, so I wasn't going to go into those in detail again.
Yeah.
Happy to take those before we go on to the financial report.
are there questions and comments? Okay. It's just worth saying that we mustn't lose sight of what was achieved in 2012-13 in our relentless focus on improving things for 13-14. So that annualised scorecard for the year is something that we should look back on and recognise all of the effort that's gone into creating what overall was a creditable performance across the entire business.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Shall we move on then and talk about money, Jack?
Yep, we'll talk about money. Good news story on the money side of things for 2012-13. We did achieve our target and managed to end the year with an operational surplus of £300,000. I'm pleased to report. And in addition to that, we've provided for £76 million worth of decommissioning costs, which were going to be funded by the Department of Health via an increase in our public dividend capital during 2013-14. However, I do need to point out that these accounts are provisional. The auditors are in at the moment. I'm hoping that the operational surplus won't change, but depending on any decisions that are made between now and when the accounts are signed off, there is likely to be changes on decommissioning costs.
Yeah.
So at this stage they do remain in draft. As I said, the auditors are currently in, and then there's nothing yet to report from the auditor point of view, but we are awaiting decisions which may affect some of those numbers.
Okay. Which would that's normally the case. We wait for the external auditors, but the particular situation we're in this year creates a greater level of uncertainty.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Tim.
So just to come back to that last point, so that's a question of whether the decommissioning costs are taken last year or this year, or is it a matter of the amount?
Or some of it at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's what I would call an exceptional item. So So it's below the line.
And in some cases, it may just be a case of moving things from an accrual where we had certainty to a provision.
Fine, okay. So for the operational performance, you don't see any risks to these numbers?
There shouldn't be any risk to those numbers.
Well, that is a good news story.
Yeah, well done.
A provisional good news story.
Provision good news
Yeah.
story.
But you know, colleagues will remember that at various points during the year we looked at in-month deficits that we were running. We didn't have a lot of room. We got to the line with the right result. Again, that didn't happen on its own. It happened because of effort, control, good management, and we should thank both the finance staff and the operational staff whose decisions lead to what was a good financial outcome.
If I could just add, I think the other party that I think deserves credit in the way in which the very turbulent second half of the year was dealt with was NHS Midlands and East, aka East of England Strategic Health Authority, who worked very closely with us on looking at the impact on the 0845 contract of the changes that 111, the preparations that were needed for 111. So I'd just like to acknowledge that as well.
Joe?
Obviously, last year's performance is very good, but I think it wouldn't be appropriate not just to think about what's happening currently.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we had the pressure on the service after the 21st of March, we took a very positive decision that the important thing was to improve the quality of the service we were providing and not to restrict expenditure to budgets. So I think it would be wrong to end on a very positive note on finance, when in fact at the moment we know we're spending more cash than we are potentially receiving income for. And that obviously will be a priority for the board to address very, very soon.
Can I just come back on the one point? Any additional expenditure incurred in March is reflected in the 12/30.
Yeah, I'm talking about April now.
Okay.
The position now is important. We can't not mention that
No,
at a board meeting.
And the board will, of course, be spending more time looking at that in its
Yeah.
private session later on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay. Are we comfortable to move now into the governance and compliance section of the agenda? Okay. The risk register.
The corporate risk register has actually been withdrawn from public domain this month, and this is really just to give the executive team some private space to formulate their risks, but a full copy of the register will be provided at the next board meeting.
Yeah.
The second paper on revised governance arrangements, this is really just to advise that Nick has been reinstated as the accounting officer until the 1st of May in the first instance, and also that the two subcommittees, the business of the two subcommittees will now be managed by the full trust board.
Okay, we should emphasise with this, Sarah, that this is a interim pro tem arrangement to enable us to manage our business. So we've not made any formal or permanent changes to our governance arrangements. Are there any questions about the governance arrangements? No? Clear? Okay.
And the final paper is that the register of interest, and this is just to highlight to you that the register of interest has undergone its annual review and the updated copy is reflected in the version.
Okay. Are there any questions on the register of interest? No? Okay. Thanks, Sarah. That's great. We can then move on to a set of minutes and feedback from committees. So we've got 3 sets of minutes, I think, and 1 verbal feedback. So can we please start with the minutes from the Clinical Governance Committee of the 8th of March?
I've already given verbal feedback to the board previous meeting, so this is just a formal record. So nobody has any specific questions, so just take it.
Questions to see? Okay. Peter's not here to present the minutes from the Audit Committee of last time, but it's the same situation. He's already given us verbal feedback. If there are any questions on those minutes, I imagine that somebody is probably able to answer them, or if not, we should note them and carry them forward. No? Okay, that's fine then. Thank you. That we've got minutes and feedback from the existing services transition and decommissioning committee, which met on the date of the last board, the 25th of March. Any questions to you, Trevor?
There's one point I would raise under item 4.1, because there was an action the subcommittee asked to be addressed, and obviously as a subcommittee will not be meeting routinely, we need to ensure that that is still picked up. And that was to do further testing around background noise in call centres. So I think we just need to ensure that there is a process that is addressed and reported back to the board at some point.
Okay. Jack?
Thank you, Sharon. I can confirm that we did undertake that additional work over the Easter holiday period when the call centres were particularly busy. And I'm satisfied to report back that in fact you can't hear excessive noise when callbacks are played at all. You'd have to really make quite a noise for it to be picked up. But normal conversation or even calling somebody across the table isn't picked up in fact.
I'm slightly uneasy that when we hear the recording, we hear noise on the recording. I don't quite understand why the
It's
patient...
to do with the headset,
right.
and the headsets
Where it's recorded.
and with the ring, as it's there to pick up specifically each noise and voices. But in fact, it's not what the patients hear, it's only what we hear on the recording. So over Easter, I practiced on some dummy calls, calling people, you know, sat where you are, and that wasn't picked up. If you make a very loud noise, then of course you hear something. But routinely, we can be satisfied that it's not heard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, so I think we finally put that one to rest, which has been a worry for us over a period of time. Okay, great. So finally, there was also a meeting of the future NHS Direct committee on the 25th of March. The minutes are in the private section. I'm happy to give some feedback from that committee meeting, which was to say that we focused on the 3-point action plan, which Nick's already reprised for us in his chief executive's report, which was to stabilise the service, understand what happened, distill immediate actions and issues for the future, and we focused around those issues in talking specifically about actions to stabilise the service. And the other thing which I think is worth reporting back was that it was agreed that in the light of the significant performance problems that we'd experienced on the big contracts, that the committee, and this will transfer to the board as the board is operating on behalf of the committee looking at that business, that we will want to have closer sight of key operational decisions during the next period. So we will be focusing more on operational detail than heretofore we have, and in the future we probably will. But at the moment, given the performance issues, this board will take a closer interest in some of that operational detail. Are there any other questions for or about that future NHS Direct committee last month? No? Okay. Thank you. In that case, we can move on to the next section of the agenda, which is stakeholder. So last month, the Existing Services Committee listened to some call recordings. Trevor, you're going to provide us a bit of feedback on what you thought on those.
I think we didn't have any significant issues arising from the two calls. The minutes cover our comments. One, as you might imagine, was talking about how we might be able to reduce call lengths, which in the light of recent experience becomes a very important point. But I don't have anything to say. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. The Future Services Committee didn't listen to calls last time because of the pressing nature of other issues that are on the agenda there. So on stakeholder activity, we've got another substantive item. So given the operational problems with our main contracts, we have of course been very concerned about ensuring that we are providing high clinical quality and a safe service. So that's been a focus of an enormous amount of effort and focus during this difficult period. And we have a paper here which draws together what we've learned about the clinical safety and quality issues in relation to the 111 services since the launch. So it's very good to see that. And Jackie, you're going to introduce that for us. Thank you.
Okay. So throughout the period the 18th of March to the 11th of April, 122,000 calls were received by our NHS 111 services. And from that number, we have had 8 serious incidents to date, but none of those at this stage of our investigation indicate any serious harm caused by any act or omission by our services. We have received 12 compliments, 13 comments and 76 complaints. Positive feedback from patients has been about the professionalism of our staff and the speed of the service. Areas of concern expressed by patients have been around the long waits, access issues, the complexity of the assessment compared with that they were used to on our 0845 service, and also the outcome of some of the assessments. We have received a very significant amount of feedback from health and social care professionals. To put this into context, during 2012-2013, we received in that year 3,000 health professional feedback forms, whereas from mid-March this year, we have already received 1,000. Now this is clearly a resource issue for us, but it is not uncommon with new services, and it has been seen when NHS Direct first launched all those years ago, and also other big services. The main issues in that feedback are also around access, outcome of assessments, and technical issues. Every single item we received, as you would expect, gets acknowledged. They are all risk graded, and all feedback is investigated proportionate to the risk. Also, as you would expect, we are identifying and acting on the learning that we glean from any of the feedback that we receive. Happy to take any additional comments or questions.
Okay. John.
It'll be a very difficult question to answer, I guess, but I wonder whether you have any feel how many, and I'm thinking particularly about health professional comments, how many of the queries that are being raised related to the pressure the service was under around the Easter period, and how many are related to the new pathways system, so as part of an ongoing problem issue.
That information is being collated, Trevor, as each piece of feedback is gone through, and we're identifying any themes and trends. I don't have that answer for you here today, but I can get that for you, yes.
Yeah, it's whether a one-off because of the system problem,
The pressure at the time,
or whether
yes.
it's an ongoing systems issue. It'd be nice to get a feel for it.
I'll get help with that.
Thank you, Jackie. So I've asked the question, how can we get a feel for whether the proportion of incidents is similar to or different from a normal 0845 workload? And I know that that's not a question with a simple answer, because the call mix is different, and the and the case mix is different. But what I am drawing, I think, from this is that we haven't seen an upsurge in clinical incidents over the period since the new 111 service. I'm sure there's much more analysis to carry on and be done, but would that be a fair assessment?
That's a correct summary, yes.
Okay. Tim?
There's a flavour from the instance of feedback that the 111 overcalls medical problems, and that's also a flavour from the media. That's out of our control, I believe, at the moment, but what input can we have with other 111 providers
That's a really good
to
point.
wind back on that, because that affects the whole of the emergency care, urgent care service.
It does. I think Nick wants to make a comment on that. Do you want to go first, Nick?
After you, Jackie.
I was going to add that even from the early day feedback, we identified that 2 pathways specifically seem to be generating the highest number of high-level endpoints, as we would call them. That's the one concerning abdominal pain and also shortness of breath. So we have introduced a new training resource for staff, some additional coaching and support, and we've been rolling that out over the last 10 days to really help staff with their critical thinking of those specific questions in those pathways. And also we have fed that back to the pathways team, because they clearly need looking at.
Nick?
Just to offer, I mean, I've had this conversation on a number of occasions since the 21st of March. It will be very, well, it's deceptively easy to consider that every aspect of what we're seeing with 111 is to do with problems at launch. It is a deceptive non sequitur in reality, because clearly some of the issues that we are seeing now are not as a result of problems at launch. They are as a result of what the service is like.
Yeah.
And so the first order issues to be resolved, and which we've spoken about and have really focused on almost to the exclusion of everything else, have been ensuring that we set up the service and deal with the calls promptly and in accordance with the service that's been specified. But the second order impact, potentially, of 111 heating up, if that's not too descriptive a phrase, heating up the urgent emergency care system with referrals that are unnecessary of patients to, be it to ambulance or to A&E or to urgent doctor appointments, is a significant issue that we must not lose sight of. It's one that this board has spoken about for some time and has raised its concerns about, and it's one that I believe is that NHS England are very alive to.
Louisa?
I was just going to ask if you have any sense of how receptive the pathway sort of system is to us being able to influence how it's changed. I wonder whether, if we look back at 0845 and the changes that were made to that system and how long it took for that system to sort of improve, we're very well placed to sort of help with that learning and how receptive pathways is to that. Because I heard breathless calls, and what struck me was that there was no the algorithm took no sense of the patient's own sense of their breathlessness.
And being able to speak in sentences, for example.
Or that one child was actually sort of eating a full dinner.
Yes. We do have a request for change process direct into the Pathways team, and as you know, health colleagues by their own right, we have engagement and network with them regularly. So all the learning that we've identified, we feed back regularly. Yes.
So sorry, my question wasn't clear. Do you have any sense of the timeline for that? Because clearly, if you could improve service pretty quickly if you did make a change there.
It does depend on the priority that it's awarded. So whether it's given a priority 1 or priority 2 or priority 3 status, and then the Pathways team action accordingly. There is another release due sometime later this year, so one would very much hope that much of this learning is.
Sorry, let's just clarify that, Jackie. So, no feedback since the 21st of March will have come through in Pathways, as yet, no.
Some feedback would have gone through to Pathways since 21st
Come
March.
back in the new release,
no.
no.
No, not
So,
that I'm aware.
so when we're talking about timescales to improve these issues, what you said was you're hoping that there might be a release of Pathways before the end of the year.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a great concern, I would think.
Yes.
Sue?
It is a great concern for me, and the Clinical Governance Committee is always looking at the request for changes that are put into pathways and monitoring those that have not yet been actioned. And we have had a continuing concern through the committee that we have too many requests for change that are not being actioned quickly. And in order to get the service in a position where it's learning from itself, those requests for change really do need to be actioned, and I think we need to escalate that again.
Sorry, can I add to that?
Yeah, go on.
Are the Pathways team actually geared up to managing these, in a proper way? Because I mean, from my engineering background, this is an alteration to design. It needs to be done quickly. It needs to be done in a timescale. It needs to be either sentence or not sentence, as the case may be. It's as important getting a rejection of it and understanding why it's been rejected. And
there is a clear process, and I think it would be wrong of me to speak on behalf of another organisation at this time, but I would reassure you that our chief nurse and our system development lead meet with the Pathways team reasonably regularly as well to address many of the issues. But I think it would be wrong of me to try and answer their process, but there is a process.
Yeah.
I just observe it's a much more complex landscape. If you compare our ability to change the CSPT or teleguides system, which was, to all intents and purposes, exclusive to NHS Direct, we could make changes relatively quickly. provided that we went through a process of establishing what we now have a situation where you have a system that's used in 46 separate 111 services, each of which with local commissioners, and around 15 or 16 lead organisations for that 111 service, that each of whom have got a separate view about the importance of all of the different changes that might be introduced, and strictly speaking, a mechanical process that's quite complex for introducing upgrades which require to be coordinated across the national system. So you've moved from the world that we knew in 0845 of a relatively simple upgrade system to one that is really quite cumbersome just because of the nature of the service that we're talking about.
Louisa.
I suppose that makes it interesting, doesn't it, in that there's a considerable premium put on the local provision of services, but the thing driving the services is very sort of national and unresponsive to local needs.
Okay, I mean, we need to be cautious here. I think it's helpful to acknowledge the difficulty in making changes to pathways. It's helpful to acknowledge the complexity of the new system, and the fact that as Louisa says, in a system that was designed to be plural and more market-driven, there is a key component which is neither plural nor market-driven nor customer-sensitive. So that's a great difficulty, and one that we have highlighted before. We've also highlighted through the pilots our expectation that the 111 algorithms at this point, being relatively immature, will send a higher proportion of people to urgent endpoints, and will have a lower proportion of self-care. And we've been saying that for a long time. I think that we need to be very cautious, though, in interpreting what's happened since the contracts went live, because the pressure on A&E is a combination. That which is related to 111 will be a combination of people who've got through to 111 and who have been referred to urgent endpoints, and people who have been unable to get through and therefore take themselves to A&E. And I'm not sure that anyone is in a position at the moment to understand which of those two is important. We are, of course, very hopeful that as the operational issues get sorted out, the number of people who take themselves to urgent endpoints because they can't get through will disappear, and we will be left with the excess urgent care referrals that may be driven by the pathways content itself. And as Nick rightly says, we shouldn't lose sight of that being a driver, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later in order to protect the wider NHS system and to give better outcomes for patients. Thanks very much. I think that was a useful conversation. I think that probably brings us to the end of that paper and actually our formal public board agenda today. Is there any other business that anyone would like to raise?
Thank you.
We meet again then on the 3rd of June here in Lehman Street at 10:30. I'm going to resolve to close the public meeting. Thank you very much. Anyone else who's with us online is very welcome to fill in the feedback form. We're going to take a 5-minute break and start again in private at 11:30. Thanks very much.